So as I just mentioned, and I was talking myself through this, so thanks for that, Madan. We would have missed out on all the fun visuals. That's the last statement that I made, is just it's sort of very underutilized, highly oversimplified, and just the ability for us to use it in ways that are, in my opinion, relatively ignored in some aspects, if not many. And we really should be paying more attention, especially in an increasingly dynamic and competitive market. So moving on to the first fun slide. All right. So the way that I look at data is a little bit different than sometimes is typically looked at. So first, I want to call to your attention this little graphic I created, which is essentially a data point. Think of that as a customer. And what I've done is sort of split out that layers. We're all used to talking about our each of our sales or our stores or the way that they get to, whether it's an e-commerce or brick and mortar. We're used to telling that story, right? So in order to tell that story, there are enormous amounts of underlying data layers, and they're kind of like pages in a book. And the way that the consumer interacts with those pages in the book and the available information is essentially how they're getting to your store. And you're telling that story in a certain manner. So what I want to do is introduce you to that three-dimensional in space and time sort of concept. And this is where we're really starting to play very interestingly in marketing and advertising right now. And it can have really big dividends in terms of finding opportunity that wasn't on the table before, even if you've optimized, whether it's PMAX or whatever you're doing. Really, it's all about, and I like to put this into sort of the where does the rubber meet the road, so to speak, is we're all looking at generating better efficiency to sale or more sales, even under the same budget spend, right? Like budgets get tight or things change, and you want to find further sales or opportunity even in your core territory. And this is one potential way of doing that as one use case scenario. I want to call attention to sort of, if you can see my cursor, the bottom right-hand corner, I've just created a time series overlap. And I'm going to take you through this, and I'm going to bring this up again later. We'll talk about it more in a little bit of detail. But the concept here is that each of these are sales in state. The individual dots that are moving up and down over time, those are individual zip codes. The colors, the light colors, are like city areas, right? So we think about, for instance, very often we think about our data in the term of state or DMA, or some of these sort of overall really, I would consider them coarse geographic resolutions, and you're actually missing out on much of the leverageable detail, and that's the first time I'll mention that, which is there is detail in your sales data that you can access that is leverageable to get more efficient. And part of that is identifying patterns. So as you're looking at this, and I think Madan will make this available this presentation available later, but even, for instance, in this area in Illinois, which is around Chicago, you see a lot of the color, sort of, I don't know what you would call that, but dark blue or whatever. You see some of the zip codes in around Chicago, they're moving similarly. They move up and down at the same time, but other ones have a weird rise when others are going down. So what I want to bring the concept to is that there are leverageable and identifiable patterns, both at the broad scale, and then there are anomalies, and there are other things going on in that more fine scale. So before I move on, is that everyone, a few nods or a yes or so will be good. But I think, how does that, resonate with people here so far? Any questions? And I do have a question here after I go through this. It'll be my first official question to all of you. And what I want to put is, this is a little bit more of concept, right? Is everything that I just showed you, I find it very interesting. But let's figure out how, what is really going on here? Why is space so important to that, in addition to just that maybe one zip code performs a little differently than another? So I'm going to just use an analogy of a raindrop falling in the mountains here. So in this case, for instance, the raindrop falls in one location, and you can view that as your customer, right? And they are, let's say, somewhere outside of Texas, in a suburb in Texas. And depending on where that raindrop falls, it's going to this store, whether it's e-commerce or whether it's physically in that location, it leads to that one individual in that store. But the raindrop falls just a little bit different or in a different location. Oops. And it's going to your store, which maybe is this blue store, right? That's really where we want them to go. So you want to maximize your ability to sort of direct and access the pattern of where things are occurring so that you're you are influencing the outcome, making it more likely that you're generating that sale. For instance, just small little changes, it's going down a different area and your competitor is going to get it. And that's what we want to avoid. So essentially what we want to do is we're taking this geographical space where things are occurring, whether that's where they're sitting with their phone while they're eating lunch, whether it is just some aspect of where they live or underlying community demographic, which we'll get into. And we're going to apply that directly to your sales as a whole. So, and that's another big thing is that we can often apply this directly to your national sales, your regional sales, but at the zip code level. So if you look at it at a DMA or other level, and I'll show you this in a second, you're often missing out on ability to optimize. And so, we really want to increase the likelihood of your sale under that budget scenario is one way I like to put it. Okay, so by the way, all of this is real data. I'm not going to tell you what the data is from, and sometimes I'll change the story of that data. But you're looking at data right here. We're looking at, I've sort of broken it down. You can see the states underlying there and they're labeled, but these are DMAs. How many people here work in DMA? Just, give a yes or a no or something in the chat, just so that I have an idea of that. That'd be really great. So in this here, and this is again another just conceptual question that I want to sort of bring out to everyone is, if we were to look at these DMAs here, and for instance, let's look at the Philadelphia, PA DMA and the New York DMA, right? If I were to look at that, and let's just pretend that these are sales, right? It could be other data, and we'll use it as another example later, but let's pretend that these are sales at the zip code level. All of these are zip codes coded to the darker the red, the more the sale in this example. How would you, this is a general question for the group, and there's no right or wrong answer, but would you treat the DMA the same now, looking at this and knowing that your sales are varying over this whole region? Or would you treat it differently?
It's maybe Alan, how about we pick on you? So suppose it's your business and you were marketing, Gardens Alive, and would you spend more on these zip codes that are red or less on them and more on the ones that are yellow? How would you approach go-to-market?
I think that you're looking for the data that's going to give you the insight so that you can seize the opportunity with some intelligence. But you even think about the elections and you look at county by county versus the state. And it's the same with us. I don't know why I make the decisions to purchase the things I do when I do. And I try to figure out why millions of customers are making those decisions. So I love this so far.
Okay, all right. Go ahead, Ken.
Well, I think what Ellen was just saying there is I think really important, right? And you bring in even just politics to it, right? We're not saying that in one region that there are 0 customers and in another region it's all customers, right? It's it's sort of a gradation, right? You just want to maximize your likelihood on a curve to generate sales, right? It's just like in politics, even the most red county still has Democratic voters, right? It's where do you want to apply that money to the best impact, right? And you can make an informed decision about mitigating your risk in that spend and how to figure that out. Now, we'll get a little bit into this a little bit further, but I like to refer to something as the magic mix, right? And what we can do, to your point, Ellen, which is we can statistically validate your sales against other data, all of these different data sources. Let's say we start with 1,000, and then we narrow it down to the top 12. And that magic mix of the top 12, we can then use, and it was the earlier question. I'm sorry, what was the name of the gentleman that was speaking earlier that asked me the other question?
Eli.
Yeah, Eli asked a great question. And essentially, we take that magic mix and we're able to answer both Eli's question and Ellen's question. And so it depends on how we look at the data and what analysis we run. But overall, we're looking for what that magic mix of suitable factors that are going to drive the highest likelihood of a sale. And then we can understand that even at the national level of, okay, these are out of the 33,000 zip codes in the contiguous US, maybe we only need to focus on 4,000 of those because that's the highest likelihood of sales for us. And then we maybe do a brand awareness campaign in other ones. And for instance, Madan's going to show later, and we're going to talk about later in the case study presentation, one really great aspect of this is you can really well define where your core brand awareness reaches to, and where you have outliers of low sales within that core area, and then where you have high sales of outliers outside of that core area. So you can use it in a variety of different ways, again, to Eli's point earlier. So I'm going to move on from this, just because we'll bring up this sort of graphic again in a second. I do want to talk a little bit about data, right? And Nadan mentioned census data. It's insanely valuable. I view it as equivalent of, a bar of gold or platinum or whatever metal is most valuable at present. The amount of data in census data that we all pay for in our taxes is not to be undervalued. And essentially what it is cohort ready for analysis data, which has estimates of variance and the overall estimate of what the value is. And that can be done at the zip code level. It can be done at the state level. It can even go down into the neighborhood level, right? So sometimes the best leverageable patterns are down at the neighborhood level. For instance, if you want to know where to put certain billboards, you want to look at travel time to work, which are, really great and valuable things depending on your business. If you have brick and mortar stores, whatever the case is, you can leverage all of that just from census data. And so, has anybody here, are they using census data? I know that a lot of companies do, and it's interesting to, it's kind of I'm curious, how are you currently using it? Is anybody here using census data? No, okay. All right, so this is a great introduction then. The amount of data here in census data alone, we can just stick with that for today, though I am going to mention some others. You can take the data at a national scale you understand the quality of it, and it's ready-made cohorts. You can link that up with your own sales data and create a really strong understanding of the patterns and what are the underlying community qualities that are driving your sales, right? And this is enormously powerful. I've done this across the different types of industries, whether it's high-end healthcare, whether it's the legal field, whether it's high-end fashion, you name it, it's applicable as long as you have a well-defined audience. And that could be even well-defined audiences within your company. For instance, flip-flops or shoes versus, teeth whitening, or male or female centric. Or to Ellen's point, some things are more conservative or less conservative driven. It really becomes, what is the question that you have, and you can drive your answer utilizing zip level statistics or other to understand at that level. Now, we're talking about it in terms of incrementality and targeting, and certainly that is an amazing use case that we're still uncovering the potential for, but there is a lot more capable of that, even just from the C-level of understanding what your client potential is and where you may be leaving money on the table. So back to this again, and I think we've covered some of this already, so luckily I can go through this kind of quickly. The question really is, what's the appropriate scale? And I would make the strong encouragement that while it is important to look at or potentially do your media buys overall as an understanding, maybe at the DMA or the state level, or you're doing it nationally, to truly understand and then to optimize that spend, whatever channel it is, you have to look at it at a more granular scale. So in this case, I would highly suggest that you at least look at everything from a zip code scale, because that's where patterns really start to come alive, and you can actually leverage them relative to your ad buy, relative to where you're doing your traditional media, if you're still doing that, many of us are. Just how you approach things in general. I think an analogy that I sometimes use is, I grew up outside of Philadelphia, and so that's a big sort of Eagles territory, sporting analogy. And in this case, if you were to advertise, say, the Dallas Cowboys outside of Philadelphia, people wouldn't buy anything. Same thing as if, now I live just north of Boston, and in that case, if I'm not advertising the Red Sox and I'm advertising something else like the Eagles, you're going to get it. Some things will similarly fall flat. So you can vary your message, and you can do a lot of things once you start understanding the importance of physical location, as well as all the other analyses you're doing. And that's, we can talk about that as well. But I do want to make the general statement that this is in addition to your typical stats that you're running from Harvard Business School or wherever it is that you're running your stats from. If you are running them, hopefully you are. This is an addition to that is going to add increased ability to understand and find opportunity for your business. And I think that's a really important point. So it's not a standalone thing. It really is synergistic with what you're already doing likely. So I'm going to move on to this. I am going to mention a few sort of details, since I know there are some detail-oriented folks in here, and I might have to back out of this so I can remove this. Yeah, there we go. So I'm going to start with this, and you'll see this in Madan's, the version of the case study that we're going to look at after we finish this part of the presentation. And essentially, this is what I mentioned before. So this is the I-95 corridor, right? Here's Boston up here. We trace this down through New York and Philadelphia and down into DC. And in this instance, I've labeled it relatively clearly here. And so what we see here is essentially the core boundaries of the brand reach or brand awareness. That's a great way to view this, of this particular brand. And so what you're seeing here is you have your high orders where you're doing really well in your core territory. But then as you're getting away from the I-95 corridor, you're starting to see low order outliers in your general high order area, meaning this is still your brand territory, but you have opportunity. For instance, this is just one of many opportunity maps where we're showing that these are areas that you may want to pick up or increase some aspect of your approach. And there are other statistics that need to happen in order for that to occur. However, this is a great visualization. Now, all of this out here in this light blue area, those are areas which can be considered your not very well performing areas, meaning you generally don't pick up really great sales there. It's not your core territory. And the red are your high performing outliers there. These are very important to, for instance, Eli's prior question, which is, can we take information from one area and apply it in another? And can we figure out exactly what's going on to drive our understanding at a national scale, right? So for instance, these are high performing zip codes outside of, say, a core area of brand awareness. And it's really interesting just to look at these, right? So one of the overriding factors just of this, and I'll take you through it, is that this is in many instances pretty rural. Now, not all of it. I mean, you do have Albany, you have other places, for instance, up here, you're coming up through the Hudson Valley. It's not necessarily just population driven or urban development sort of driven. But you do have many areas it's an easy way to talk about it, that are less developed or more rural. And rural areas often have a very different, there's an urban rural gradient in many company sales, right? So we're able to identify those, work with them. And, for instance, for this company, if you just wanted to advertise in these red areas, that might be very good. There's another test that will give us the other ones around those that would be match markets. So then you can, sort of approach that area and do it more efficiently. And again, it's all in the name of efficiency. So I do mention a few things over here for those who are technically proficient. We can certainly talk about this, or I'm happy to talk about it later. I won't do that to you now, but we use various forms of regression. We do use different types of cluster analysis and boundary definition. That's what you're looking at here. So we're testing for conditions of non-stationarity and spatial autocorrelation. So non-stationarity is, I like to call it the snowbird phenomenon. Like we as human beings move around, right? So where I live on the seacoast of New Hampshire, for instance, we have a huge influx of people that are from Florida during the summer season, right? So that is an entire market segment that moves up to New Hampshire during the summer season. And then they move back again during the winter to take advantage of the warm temperatures in Florida outside of Miami. So that's a condition called spatial non-stationarity. If you're not addressing that quality in your data set, and there's a lot of nuance to it, but that's a good example, you may actually be, if you're just doing typical regression, missing out on the actual pattern that's leverageable, meaning the statistics will actually come up with a null, not a pattern that you can leverage. Whereas if you utilize spatial stats, there may be the strongest signal ever. And that's what we're really getting at, is identifying signals and patterns that otherwise you would simply not be aware of. We do time series analysis relative to that, like seasonality and trends. And of course, we want to link. And here's another aspect, and I'll bring it up in a second. Let's say you are running Google's Performance Max search, right? Everybody's doing it. We're spending a lot of money on it. I know that Madan often talks about PMax in terms of incrementality and that aspect of it. And I'll give an example there. But what if we were actually able to sort of decipher the black box that is PMax by taking data out of it, looking at it from a standpoint of what I've been mentioning here, and then reapply that information back into PMax to make an AI algorithm even better. And Google actually, that's why they allow you to do targeting, because they know that some people know their businesses even better than they do. So I will mention that. We do use machine learning in the model selection, which you would know as an aspect of AI. I'll just sort of leave that there in case anyone wants to talk about it. Let's see, move through here. I think we'll leave it in this area. I'll just talk about this here. This is sort of, again, an opportunity map. You can view it as, these are impressions, right? So we generated this. I'm just focusing on New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine, because it's easy to look at just a few states rather than the entire nation. But these are impressions, right? Where campaigns were shown for a search campaign, right? And that varies. And then the question is, where is it that I should be optimizing that, right? So we pull the data out. We again look at it geospatially. And in this instance, now we have areas where once we link it up to sales, once we link it up to the underlying demographics, et cetera, we now know that some of those areas were really strong and have enough impressions, and other areas actually need impressions relative to the underlying population. So there is ability to generate opportunity in sales, and Madan would call that lift, right? So it's potential for lift in a given area. And I will let Madan speak to that because he's the expert there, but this is kind of tying that a little bit together in one use case study.